No contact feels like stepping into the unknown, like walking through a dark tunnel with no idea what's waiting on the other side. Your mind races. Are they thinking about you? Are they missing you? Or have they already moved on without a second thought? But here's what most people don't understand. Silence is never just silence. It's a battlefield, a war of patience, emotions, and control. Just because they haven't reached out doesn't mean they aren't struggling. In fact, when someone is truly hurting, they don't always show it in the ways you'd expect. Pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hides in the quiet, in the spaces between words, in the things left unsaid. The truth is, when a person is suffering, their actions will betray them. They might pretend to be fine, post pictures that make it seem like they're thriving, or surround themselves with distractions. But there's one sign, one undeniable, powerful indicator that reveals the truth. And once you see it, everything changes. Think of a tree standing tall in a storm. The leaves may not shake, the trunk may not bend, but deep underground, the roots are being torn apart. That's how it is when someone is hurting but trying to act strong. They might look steady on the surface, but inside they're being pulled in every direction. No contact forces a person to face themselves. And that's the hardest thing for most people to do. When you were in their life, you were a shield, a comfort, a distraction from their own thoughts. Now that you're gone, they have to sit in their own silence, and that silence grows louder every day. You see, we live in a world where people constantly try to escape discomfort. They scroll, they swipe, they stay busy, anything to avoid being alone with their thoughts. But no contact forces them into that uncomfortable space. And when someone is truly hurting, they won't be able to just sit with it. That's when the cracks start to show. There's a saying, a drowning man doesn't yell for help. He thrashes, he panics, he grabs onto anything he can. That's what you need to look for, not the words they say, but the actions they take. The way they behave when they think you aren't watching. The subtle, desperate moves that reveal what's really happening inside. So if you're wondering whether they're feeling the same kind of pain you are, remember this. Real suffering doesn't always announce itself. It hides in their choices, in their patterns, in the small things they don't even realize they're doing. And once you recognize it, you'll see the truth. They're not as okay as they pretend to be. And here's the best part. You don't have to do anything. Their own mind will do the work for you. That's the power of walking away. That's the strength of self-respect. Because when you know your worth, you don't chase, you don't beg, you don't break. Stay with me till the end of this video, because I'm about to reveal something powerful, something that will change how you see this entire situation. But before that, if you're finding value in this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and press the bell icon so you never miss out on these life-changing lessons. And now, I want you to claim your power. Drop a comment below with the affirmation, I know my worth. Say it. Own it. Because the moment you truly believe it, the game changes forever. Understanding emotional expression. People don't always show pain the way you expect. Some lash out, some withdraw, and others wear a mask so convincing that you'd swear they don't feel a thing. But here's the truth. Emotions don't just disappear. They don't dissolve into thin air like smoke. They sink, they settle, and eventually they surface in ways that can't be hidden forever. Sigmund Freud once said, "Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways." And that's exactly what happens. When someone suppresses pain, it doesn't vanish. It festers. It simmers beneath the surface, waiting for the moment it finally breaks through. So if they seem detached, indifferent, even happy, don't be so quick to believe the act. People assume that if someone isn't reaching out, isn't showing signs of distress, then they must be fine. But what if silence isn't proof of strength? What if it's just a shield, a desperate attempt to control what they don't want you to see? Think about it. If they truly didn't care, why would they need to prove it? Why would they go out of their way to look unaffected? Indifference doesn't require effort. Real detachment doesn't come with a performance. And yet, here they are, putting on a show for the world. The smiles, the forced happiness, the sudden change in behavior. These are not signs of someone who has moved on. These are signs of someone who is trying to convince themselves they have. People fear vulnerability more than anything. It's easier to pretend than to admit that no contact is cutting deeper than they expected. Their pride won't let them show weakness. Their ego won't let them reach out. Their fear of looking like the one who lost keeps them locked in a silent battle with themselves. There's a reason they say, the ones who act like they don't care are usually the ones who care the most. Because deep down, that indifference is just another form of suffering. A person who is truly at peace doesn't need to prove it. But someone who is struggling, they will go to great lengths to hide it. Think of it like this. Imagine a dam holding back an entire river. At first it stands strong, unshaken, but with time, small cracks begin to appear. Tiny leaks, barely noticeable at first. And then, one day, the pressure becomes too much, and the flood comes rushing through. That's what happens when someone tries to suppress emotions. They can hold it together for a while, but the cracks will always start to show. So if they're silent, if they're distant, if they're pretending like none of this matters, don't take it at face value. Look deeper. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is just a storm waiting to break. When their social media becomes a stage. If they truly didn't care, would they be trying so hard to prove it? Would they suddenly become more active, posting stories, selfies, and updates as if life has never been better? Would they start sharing things they never cared about before, liking posts they once ignored, or dropping subtle hints that somehow always seem to circle back to you? These behaviors aren't random. They're calculated. They're quiet messages, hidden in plain sight. Because when someone is truly at peace, they don't feel the need to announce it. They just live. But when someone is unsettled, when your absence starts to sink in, that's when the performance begins. The legendary Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "People are disturbed not by things, but by the view they take of them." And that's exactly what's happening. Their biggest struggle isn't that you're gone, it's what your absence represents. It's the realization that they no longer have access to you, that the control they once had is slipping through their fingers. That's what stings the most. Think about it. If they were truly indifferent, they wouldn't need to be seen. They wouldn't need to show the world how fine they are. But now, suddenly, they're louder, more visible, more desperate to be noticed. Why? Because silence is a mirror, and they don't like what it's reflecting back at them. It's like a child who's lost in a crowd. They don't always cry for help. Sometimes they just make noise, hoping someone will notice. That's exactly what's happening when they start posting more, interacting more, and making sure their presence is felt. They aren't reaching out directly, but they're still trying to remind you they exist. And the irony, the more they try to prove they don't miss you, the more obvious it becomes that they do. 2. Social media activity. Imagine scrolling through your feed and suddenly noticing that someone who rarely posted is now everywhere, sharing selfies, nightlife snaps, gym sessions, and even little moments that scream, "I'm fine." But if they were truly okay, would they need to shout it from the rooftops? When no contact hits hard, many turn to social media as a stage to prove their strength, even if inside they're crumbling. They make it seem like life has become a constant celebration. One minute they were quiet, and the next they're flooding their stories with laughter and fun. It might look like they've transformed into a social media influencer overnight. But here's the catch. This isn't just about having fun. It's a calculated move, a way to remind both themselves and you that they're still out there, still alive, still not broken by your absence. Think of it like an actor on stage. When the curtain falls and the applause dies down, the actor steps off into the shadows. But while under the spotlight, every gesture and every smile is deliberate, meant to convey a message. That's exactly what's happening here. They're not reaching out directly. Instead, they're performing for an audience that includes you. Their posts, updates, and even the hashtags they choose are like carefully chosen lines in a script meant to stir up emotions. There's a famous saying, "Actions speak louder than words." And in this case, their online behavior is speaking volumes. When someone is genuinely content, they don't need to broadcast every moment. True happiness is quiet. But when no contact leaves an empty space in their life, that void is too painful to ignore. So they try to fill it with activity, anything to distract themselves and perhaps to remind you of what you're missing. Ask yourself, why would someone suddenly care so much about posting pictures from a night out or sharing a quote about moving on? It's not because they've suddenly found a secret formula for happiness. More often than not, it's because they're fighting an internal battle. They might be using these public displays as a shield, a way to cover up the hurt that lies beneath. In their heart, every post is a silent confession. "I miss what we had," or "I'm not okay without you." Yet they won't admit it directly. Instead, they let their social media do the talking. There's a powerful metaphor here. Imagine a bird that suddenly takes flight from its cage. It flutters around, appearing free and joyful, but its wings are still weak from years of confinement. In the same way, their sudden burst of social media energy might seem liberating, but it's really a signal of discomfort. They're trying to convince themselves, and you, that they've broken free from the pain of separation. But if you look closer, the effort they put into every post is like the flutter of those fragile wings, a sign that something isn't quite right. And consider this. The more they try to convince the world that they're thriving, the more you begin to wonder, is it possible that their exuberance is a mask, a desperate effort to cover up the sting of your absence? Their likes, shares, and constant updates are not random acts. They're a language of their own. Every picture, every caption is a piece of a puzzle that reveals their inner turmoil. It's like watching a fireworks display, brilliant and loud, but brief flashes that hide the darkness of the night sky. The irony is that while they're busy curating a perfect image online, they might be suffering inside. They may be scrutinizing your reactions just as much as you might be watching theirs. Every time you log in, they're hoping you'll see their posts, that you'll feel a twinge of regret or curiosity about what you once shared. They make it for you, a subtle reminder of a past that still holds power over both of you. So, next time you notice that sudden burst of online activity, don't just scroll by. Ask yourself, is this really about newfound happiness, or is it a cry for help? Why would someone who was once quiet suddenly turn into a social media star? It's not about the pictures or the status updates. It's about the story they're trying to tell without saying a word. Their silence in direct communication may be deafening, but their online presence is a loud, intricate dance of emotions that can reveal much more than they'd ever admit out loud. If you find yourself caught in this web of digital displays and hidden emotions, remember, the truth is often hidden in plain sight. Their social media is not just a timeline of events, it's a diary of their inner struggle. And understanding that can change how you see the situation entirely. 3. When they show up without showing up. Ever notice how some people slip through the cracks of your life, not quite appearing in person, but never truly disappearing either? It's like they're casting a long shadow that follows you around, even though they're nowhere to be seen. That's exactly what happens when an ex starts reaching out indirectly. They don't break the rules of no contact outright, but they find subtle ways, through mutual friends, acquaintances, or random messages, to remind you of their presence. And make no mistake, this isn't just coincidence. It's a calculated move that often reveals they're hurting more than you might suspect. You might suddenly hear from a mutual friend who says, "Hey, I bumped into your ex the other day," and guess what they asked? Maybe it's something as harmless as, "How have you been?" or "Are they doing all right?" But why would someone who's supposedly moved on feel the need to inquire at all? It's simple. If they were genuinely indifferent, they wouldn't bother. Indifference is silent and effortless. Concern, on the other hand, is neither of those things. This indirect approach can also show up as random messages that pop into your phone at the most unexpected times. "Hey, do you remember the name of that restaurant we tried once?" Or, "I just found your hoodie. Should I drop it off somewhere?" On the surface, these seem innocent, practical even. But dig a little deeper and you'll see the hidden motive. These messages aren't really about the restaurant or the hoodie. They're about cracking open the door that was firmly shut when no contact began. They're about testing the waters, seeing if you'll respond, and gauging if you're still invested in any way. Pride plays a massive role here. Many people can't bear the idea of being the first to admit they miss someone. They'd rather send a carrier pigeon of a message indirectly, hiding their true intentions behind mundane questions. It's like they're tiptoeing around a sleeping dragon, hoping to sneak past without fully waking it. Why? Because once you awaken the dragon, once you admit you still have feelings, they believe the power dynamic shifts. Suddenly, they're not the vulnerable one. You are. Yet, as Napoleon Bonaparte famously said, "Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake." In the context of no contact, they might have thought it was a mistake for you to step away, to go silent. They may have assumed you'd come crawling back, or at least that they wouldn't care if you didn't. But now, the silence is thicker than they anticipated. It's weighing on them, reminding them of a hole in their life that once was filled. This weight pushes them to reach out indirectly, to regain some semblance of control without fully admitting vulnerability. Imagine a scenario. You're standing on one side of a vast canyon and they're on the other. No contact is that gulf between you, wide, empty, echoing. They might shout across to see if you'll echo back, but they won't dare step too close to the edge for fear of falling. That's precisely what these indirect messages are. They're the faint calls from across the canyon. A word here, a name there, a random question that seems innocent enough until you realize it's a lifeline for them. Another layer to this is the role of mutual friends. You might notice that these friends suddenly become messengers, carrying little tidbits of information. Your ex mentioned that song you both used to love. Or they seemed really curious about what you've been up to. Such casual remarks can feel insignificant until you step back and ask, why bring it up now? It's because those mutual friends have become the middle ground, a safe zone where your ex can seek updates or drop hints without risking direct rejection. They're using these friends as emotional smoke signals, hoping you'll pick up on them and respond. The fact that they're going through all this trouble suggests one thing above all else: they're not over it. When people truly move on, they prioritize their peace of mind. They don't need to check in, even indirectly. There's no curiosity gnawing at them about how you're doing, no urge to see if you've replaced them or if you still spend your weekends the same way. Their life simply moves forward. So when you see them circling back, even if it's from a distance, it's a sign that your absence is unsettling. This leads to a key question. Does this mean no contact is working? More often than not, the answer is yes. No contact isn't just about punishing someone or playing games. It's about giving both parties the space to reconsider what they had and what they truly need. If they're restless enough to break the silence, even indirectly, that usually means the silence has gotten under their skin. They feel your absence in a real, palpable way, and they aren't quite sure how to handle it. Of course, this doesn't necessarily guarantee reconciliation. Sometimes, people reach out because they miss the familiar, not because they're ready to commit to something new or better. Sometimes, they just crave attention or reassurance. But, from a purely emotional standpoint, indirect outreach is a glaring neon sign that they're still affected by you. It reveals that they can't fully let go, that no contact has left them uncertain, curious, and maybe even a little scared of what life looks like without you in it. Ultimately, the most important thing for you is to recognize what's happening beneath the surface. Don't get caught up in the idea that it's just a hoodie or just a restaurant name. Appreciate that these little messages are stepping stones into your life again, subtle but intentional. And while they might think they're playing it safe by staying on the edges, every small attempt at indirect communication actually speaks volumes about how they're coping or failing to cope with your absence. 4. When cryptic words speak volumes. Imagine scrolling through your feed and suddenly coming across posts that seem to carry hidden messages. A deep, emotional quote about love and loss, lyrics from a song that cuts straight to the heart, or philosophical musings on new beginnings that feel too personal to be mere random thoughts. When no contact is in effect, these cryptic or emotional posts are not just content for your followers. They're carefully crafted signals meant for someone in particular. They're a way for an ex to speak volumes without uttering a direct word, revealing inner turmoil that they might not even fully understand themselves. Think about it. If someone were truly over the past, they wouldn't feel compelled to share such weighty sentiments with the world. Genuine healing doesn't need an audience. True peace is quiet. But when the heart is still in distress, it finds its outlet in these enigmatic posts. They make it seem as if every deep quote or melancholic lyric is a puzzle piece, a fragment of a larger emotional story that begs to be deciphered. And deep down, it's often a message that they want you to see. Consider the famous words of the great psychologist Carl Jung. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In the context of these cryptic posts, it suggests that what you see on your feed is not a random outpouring of feelings. Instead, it's the unconscious mind of your ex trying to communicate. They may not fully grasp the reasons behind their own emotions, yet they channel those deep-seated feelings into vague, indirect messages that resonate with anyone who's ever felt lost or heartbroken. Picture a painter in the middle of a storm, trying to capture the chaos of nature on a canvas. The strokes are wild, the colors blend into one another, and the final piece seems abstract to the untrained eye. But if you look closer, you'll see that every brushstroke is deliberate, every color chosen to convey a specific emotion. That's what these cryptic posts are like, a canvas of raw, unfiltered emotion. They are not designed to win likes by being trendy. They're designed to express something much more personal, a story of pain, regret, or longing that the writer can't say directly. Now, you might ask yourself, why would someone use cryptic language instead of just saying how they feel? The answer lies in vulnerability. Direct expression of hurt requires a level of openness that many are not ready to confront. It's easier to hide behind layers of metaphor and ambiguity than to admit that the pain of separation is still very real. They choose to mask their true feelings with philosophical musings and reflective quotes because these offer a safe distance from the raw truth. It's like putting on sunglasses on a sunny day. The real intensity is there, but it's softened just enough so that the pain isn't glaringly obvious. Think about the metaphor of a secret garden. On the surface, it might look overgrown and wild, but hidden behind its tangled vines is a carefully cultivated space filled with rare, beautiful flowers. In the same way, these cryptic posts may appear chaotic or disjointed at first glance. Yet, beneath that apparent randomness lies a carefully curated emotional landscape. They reveal that despite the outward appearance of calm or detachment, there's a profound internal struggle, a longing to be understood, to be seen, even if only from afar. And let's not forget the role of nostalgia. Often, these posts include subtle nods to memories shared between you and your ex. A line from a song you once loved together, a quote that echoes a conversation you had, or an image that hints at a past that can never be recreated. It's their way of keeping the connection alive, of ensuring that the memories linger long after the silence of no contact has settled in. It's as if every post is a gentle reminder that while the relationship may have ended, the impact it had still resonates deeply. In essence, when you see your ex sharing deep, moody, or philosophical content, especially if this is a new behavior for them, it's a clear sign that they're still hurting. They're channeling emotions that they cannot express directly because they're too raw, too potent, and too vulnerable. They're using these cryptic messages as a shield, a form of indirect outreach that keeps you in their thoughts while allowing them to maintain a semblance of control over their own vulnerability. Before you scroll past, consider what these posts might be saying about the state of their heart. They're not merely filling space in a digital timeline. They're sending out signals, hoping that you'll read between the lines and recognize the unspoken truth, that your absence has left a mark, one that's both deeply painful and profoundly human. If this resonates with you, if you see these signs in your own experiences, I invite you to take a moment and reflect. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon for more insights, and drop a comment below with the affirmation, "I know my worth." Your voice and your journey matter, and together we can navigate these challenging emotional landscapes with honesty and strength. 5. When happiness feels like a mask. Imagine scrolling through your ex's social media and noticing a sudden explosion of happiness. Pictures from wild nights out, constant updates about new adventures, and selfies that scream, "I'm living my best life." If they were genuinely over the past, would they feel the need to prove anything? When someone is truly content, their joy doesn't need an audience. But when the heart is still nursing a deep wound, It often overcompensates with a performance so exaggerated it almost feels theatrical. Think of it this way. If happiness were a costume, they've donned an elaborate outfit, designed not to reveal their true emotions, but to hide them. They make it appear as if every moment is a celebration. Suddenly they're out with friends, hitting new hotspots, partying as if each day is a fresh start. It's as if they're trying to convince the world, and maybe even themselves, that life is a non-stop festival. But here's the paradox. When you're truly happy, you don't need to shout it from the rooftops. True contentment is quiet, steady, and doesn't require validation from likes, comments, or double taps. The famous writer Maya Angelou once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." In this case, what you see isn't necessarily who they are deep down. It's who they want you to believe they are. Their constant parade of over-the-top fun is a mask, a brilliant yet desperate act meant to cover up the void left by your absence. It's a defense mechanism. They're not naturally a social butterfly, but when the pain of no contact becomes unbearable, they might flood their life with distractions. Every party, every staged photo, every overly enthusiastic post is a way to fill an emptiness they refuse to face head-on. Ask yourself, why would someone who was once more reserved suddenly transform into the life of the party? Why would they feel the need to broadcast every fleeting moment of joy? The answer is simple. They're trying to convince themselves and you that they're fine, even if every fiber of their being is telling a different story. It's like watching a candle flame in a storm. The light flickers wildly, trying desperately to shine bright, but the turbulence around it reveals the instability beneath. Their overcompensation is that flickering flame, a desperate effort to hold on to a semblance of warmth and stability amid an internal chill. Imagine a garden where every flower blooms in unnaturally vivid colors, almost too perfect to be real. The garden looks beautiful from afar, but up close you notice the harshness of the artificial colors. In the same way, their newfound happiness is a spectacle, a carefully curated illusion meant to distract from the raw, unhealed emotions lying just beneath the surface. They're trying to prove that your absence hasn't left a scar, but deep down, every laugh and every smile is a signal of the pain they're too scared to admit. Consider also the irony of seeking attention through overcompensation. If they were truly over the past, they wouldn't feel the need to remind you or the world of what they're missing. True healing comes from an inner peace that doesn't require external validation. When someone is happy and healed, they simply live their life without feeling the need to perform for others. Their silence is their strength. But when someone is hurting, they search for any way to bridge the gap between their inner turmoil and the outer world. And sometimes that means turning up the volume on their happiness until it drowns out the pain. It's as if they're in a play where every day is a scene, and every scene is designed to elicit a reaction from you. They might know deep down that if you really cared, you'd notice the discrepancies, the way the forced smiles don't quite reach the eyes, or how the laughter seems too loud, too practiced. They're sending a silent message. I'm not okay, even if I look like I am. And if you choose not to engage, if you ignore the performance, they might even escalate it further. The harder they try to convince you, the more obvious it becomes that they're not over you. They're just desperately trying to hide their hurt behind a facade of exuberant joy. Before you scroll past these posts, pause and ask yourself, is this the genuine celebration of a new beginning, or a cry for help disguised as overcompensation? True happiness doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to be over the top. When you see this pattern, it might be less about how great life is now and more about how much they're struggling to feel whole without you in it. Their every post, every bright picture, every boastful caption is a subtle, indirect plea for acknowledgement. A hope that maybe, just maybe, you'll see through the glitter and realize that beneath it all, they're still hurting. 6. When fury finds a voice. Imagine a calm lake that suddenly begins to ripple and churn, as if disturbed by an unseen force. That's what it looks like when your ex, who once maintained a cool silence, suddenly starts exhibiting anger or passive-aggressive behavior. It's as if the calm surface can no longer hide the turbulent storm underneath. This isn't just random outbursts. These are signals that no contact is cutting deep, and they're struggling with emotions they can't quite control. When they start getting angry or making snide, subtle digs, it might seem like an unexpected eruption. One day, you might notice that they unfollow you on social media, only to reappear later as if nothing happened. Other times, a mutual friend might casually mention how your ex made a remark like, "Some people just don't know how to appreciate what they have until it's gone," or something equally biting that leaves you wondering if it's really aimed at you. These aren't offhand comments. They're calculated jabs designed to provoke a reaction, to force you to engage with the emotional chaos they're unable to contain. At this point, you might be asking, why would they act this way if they've moved on? The answer is rooted in the human tendency to mask vulnerability with anger. As Aristotle wisely observed, anybody can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person, and to the right degree, and at the right time, that's not within everybody's power. True healing and contentment don't require the energy of bitterness. When someone has truly found peace after a breakup, there's no need to lash out or throw shade. Their anger, then, isn't a sign of moving on. It's a signal that they're still hurting, that they're wrestling with unresolved emotions they can't easily set aside. Imagine a finely tuned clock that suddenly starts ticking erratically. The familiar rhythm is replaced with jarring sounds that hint at internal disrepair. That's what their behavior is like. A deviation from their usual pattern, a desperate attempt to regain control. Anger in this context isn't about blaming you directly. It's about expressing the inner turmoil caused by the void your absence has created. It's their way of saying, without words, "I'm not okay." Consider a scenario where a friend might remark, "I always thought they were so composed, but now they're acting like they've lost it." What might be going through their mind is a cocktail of emotions, frustration, regret, and perhaps even self-blame for having let the silence become so unbearable. They might even resort to indirect actions, such as posting seemingly random, provocative statuses, or making comments in group chats that carry an edge. These behaviors are like emotional boomerangs. They're thrown out into the world in hopes that they'll circle back and force you to confront the fact that they're still very much affected by the breakup. Ask yourself, why would someone use passive-aggressive tactics instead of addressing their feelings directly? The truth is, vulnerability is scary. Direct confrontation of one's pain can feel like opening a wound that's barely healed. So, instead, they choose a safer route, expressing anger through a veil of sarcasm and indirect communication. It's a way to reclaim some power over the situation without admitting that deep down they miss what was lost. Their ego, fragile and wounded, can't bear the thought of being seen as weak or desperate, so it opts for a display of defiance instead. There's a poignant irony here. The more they try to prove they're unaffected by your absence, the more it becomes clear that they're struggling, True contentment doesn't need to be loud or aggressive. It lives quietly, without the need for constant validation. But when hurt drives them to overcompensate with anger, every remark, every unfollow or refollow on social media is a breadcrumb leading back to the truth. They're still reeling from the loss. It's as if they're trying to fill an emotional vacuum with hostility, hoping that by doing so, they can somehow dispel the lingering shadows of what once was. And what about the indirect hostility that comes through mutual friends? Perhaps someone casually let slip that your ex commented, "I always knew you'd regret letting go," or something similarly sharp. Such remarks might be brushed off as mere banter, yet they are carefully placed signals. They're not meant to be overt declarations. They're whispers of discontent, meant to make you second-guess your decisions and wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's more to the story than you realize. Every time you see these subtle acts of defiance, it's a reminder that the silence imposed by no contact isn't working as a cure-all. Instead, it's stirring up emotions that have long been buried. Your ex's anger isn't a sign of indifference. It's a cry for help, a way to cope with the overwhelming realization that things have changed in ways they never anticipated. 7. When serendipity is a setup. Sometimes it feels like the universe has a mischievous sense of humor. You decide to grab a quick coffee, and there they are, right in front of you, almost as if they materialized out of thin air. You head to the gym at your usual hour, only to find them picking the treadmill next to yours, acting surprised to see you. A mutual friend invites you to a casual get-together, and suddenly your ex is there too, offering a half smile or an awkward wave. It might look like fate at first glance, but more often than not, these seemingly coincidental encounters are anything but accidental. They're signals that no contact has hit them harder than they'd like to admit. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, "There is no such thing as coincidence, only the illusion of coincidence." This idea rings especially true when someone who used to be absent from your usual haunts suddenly appears everywhere you go. If they never once cared about that small cafe you frequent, or if they always preferred a different gym across town, why the sudden change? It's rarely happenstance. Rather, it's a subtle, calculated way of tiptoeing back into your orbit without having to send a direct message or make a phone call. In essence, they're hoping that a staged run-in can accomplish what their pride or uncertainty prevents them from doing openly. A classic example is the person who claims, "Oh, I had no idea you'd be here," and yet seems more dressed up than usual, as if they prepared for the possibility of bumping into you. The real question is, why go through all the effort? When someone is genuinely over a relationship, they typically don't plan their schedule around the chance of seeing their ex. True indifference doesn't require orchestrating a scene. If they've really moved on, the last thing they'd want is to randomly cross paths, because it risks dragging them back into emotional territory they'd rather leave behind. Think of it like a stage play where the actor carefully rehearses their lines and positions, but pretends to be caught off guard when the audience walks in. The performance is meant to elicit a specific reaction: surprise, curiosity, maybe even longing. They might hope that your old feelings will resurface for just long enough that you decide to break the silence. It's easier for them to blame fate for putting the two of you in the same room than to admit they deliberately sought you out. After all, a direct text could be ignored or screenshot, but an in-person surprise encounter demands at least some level of acknowledgement. These bump-ins can also serve as a temperature check. How do you behave when they appear? Do you seem rattled or intrigued? Do you step forward to talk, or do you retreat to a corner to avoid them? Each subtle reaction you display can be interpreted, fairly or unfairly, as a sign of whether you've truly moved on. If you remain calm, they might ramp up their appearances, searching for any crack in your composure. If you seem flustered or uneasy, they might believe they still have a foothold in your emotional world, prompting them to push a little harder the next time. There's also an undercurrent of fear at play here, the fear that you've genuinely left them behind. When no contact looms large, it can feel like a heavy curtain dropping on a stage, leaving them in the dark about your life. They wonder if you still think about them, if you might be open to rekindling the connection, or if you've completely shut the door. By orchestrating these accidental moments, they're attempting to crack that door back open. They'd rather endure a slightly awkward face-to-face run-in than the cold silence of unanswered messages. Another layer to this behavior is the psychological comfort they get from proximity. Being physically near you, even if it's just in the same coffee shop, can serve as a temporary relief from the anxiety of disconnection. It's as if they're saying, "I might not be able to text or call you, but I can still remind you I exist." In some sense, they're trying to soothe their own insecurity by placing themselves in your line of sight. If you see them, if you smile, or nod, or say hello, it validates that the bond isn't completely severed. Over time, if you continue not to respond, or you keep your interactions polite but distant, they might escalate their efforts. Perhaps they'll start popping up at more significant events, or they might linger in spots they suspect you'll be. Like a moth drawn to a flame, they're driven by an emotional need that they can't fulfill on their own. No contact forces them to confront the reality of your absence, and these bump-ins are a way of fighting back against that reality without having to show outright vulnerability. In the end, the fact that they're going to such lengths to be near you is a testament to just how much no contact has affected them. If they were genuinely content, they'd let life unfold naturally instead of choreographing these surprise performances. When you suddenly find them in all your usual places, it's wise to remember Jung's notion that coincidence is often just an illusion. If it feels too convenient to be chance, it probably is. Their presence might be a silent plea for acknowledgement, a quiet way of confessing that your absence isn't as easy to handle as they once thought it would be.